I'm George Quasha. There are people here I don't know. That's always nice. I'm going to read a couple of short things I want to get just right. I think I got it just right, but rather important to me. It's that this event, the whole thing, and the Kiva room, which we will tell you about, that John will particularly tell you about, I guess, is dedicated to the late David Arner. Fantastic musician, composer, friend of decades, collaborator with John and Charles Chuck Stein in the Axial Band. And there are tapes of the four of us playing in that little Kiva room back there on the right. So if anybody wants to dip in there and get a picture of the genius of what it was like to work with David Arner as a musician and as an amazing person. And then the second, more or less formal thing is that I really want to thank Jonathan Cohen, who unfortunately is not feeling well, so he didn't make the trip to this coast, and Diana Cohen, who is here, who, right there, who are responsible for keeping this place on Earth. And they invited, I'm thanking them because they made this possible. They invited me to do this, and against my great reluctance to do the kind of work it takes to make something like this happen, I said yes because they're such adorable people. And I'm going to thank also Jeff Newman, who's here, who saved our butt by getting the lighting as good as it is. And I'm going to thank my collaborator, John Beaulieu, because he's the person who convinced me, against my better judgment, to do this publicly. This is a very private thing, and obviously nobody makes art knows that art is intimate and private, for most of us anyway. Because some years ago, he asked me to do it with his group making sounds, and it was such a beautiful experience, and what I produced was not unfortunate. It was not unfortunate, at least in my eyes. And so we did it again recently for his, he was teaching, and so we did it for his students. And that worked out so nicely that I agreed to do it again. So, and it's foolhardy, and it's, presumptuous to be able to do something. So I'm not promising you anything, by the way. You'll see the way that I do it. It'll be what it'll be, as it always is, and no more, no less. And then I'm going to thank the three artists and Roxanne, standing here, sitting there, because they made the physical part of all this happen. There's a lot of incredible collaborative work that made it happen. And so I think that's I want to make sure that I indicate that this work is not ordinary art, in the sense that I don't really feel, when it is good enough to show other people, I don't feel it's particularly necessarily, in a personal sense, my own. It's the kind of art that I hope will be comprehensible as not belonging to me or anyone who would do this kind of art. And I'll explain that possibly. Anybody who wants to read about it in depth, there's an article that I wrote several years ago that was in a Performing Arts Journal. We printed out several copies that you can have, first come, first serve. And I've tried to express in there the particular dynamic of what I call performative axial art. Now, what is axial? Just to be very brief about this, because I could talk about it all night, believe me. Axial means that there's an axis inside every moment. Gravity pulling us down toward the earth. We're standing because we manage not to surrender to gravity. And that's largely because the structure of our being has evolved to allow us to be upright on two legs in a very dynamic way, balancing at every moment. You are never in balance. You're always balancing, coming in and out of balance. But we resist that with effort, habits, structure, devices, anything we can not to fall. And we do that, we build patterns when we do that, which restricts the flexibility of our physical body in relationship. And that's highly cultural as to how we look when we do that. So the axial sense is being aware of how that doesn't depend on any of those habits, but on a state of awareness. And there are certain art forms that are based on that. Art, Tai Chi Chuan, for instance. There are many dancers know about this, that there's a way that you can move and be expressive that is aligned with that free, empty space inside you, which you learn to adapt to. And I've developed over the years art forms, my relationship to art forms, based on that principle. I'm not particularly interested in producing work that has a given effect that I know in advance. I produce what comes out of staying on that principle. And it's something you learn to do. I happen to have been doing it for 5 decades. So I have more than an ordinary awareness of what that is. And I produce things on the basis of that, whether it's, I call it axial poiesis, because poiesis means making. And so that includes axial art, meaning something with a physical outcome, like a thing. Axial music, axial body practice. I've developed certain body practices based on that. All of this is a very long story, but I just wanted to sort of say the simplest and basic thing about it, because that's what you're going to see me doing the way that I do it. I usually, it's a very private thing because I have to be in a particular state of mind. And John is going to make that possible with the tuning forks. When I've done it publicly, I've always done it with John's assistance. I wouldn't do it without him publicly, because the sound is what I can orient to that makes me forget that you're all here, which I need to do, so I can say, but I'm so glad you are. Thank you. So there's some statements from here that I was about to read, but I think I've bored you enough with the theory, because it's more than theory, it's a practice of being. And if it comes out to something that people identify as art, which when I did balanced stone sculpture, people said, oh, that looks great, you should show other people. So I said, well, maybe it's art. And then I had the shows, I did shows. So, if you make something happen, other things will happen around it. So whatever that is. So working on principle is what I call it. And I actually think of principle art, which is art that's not trying to be the continuation of a tradition. It's not trying to be true to any external values that establish themselves as a standard of whether something is or isn't accomplished. Because I deeply believe that art is at root an expression of a human possibility that is intrinsic to what we are. And I'm interested in studying that, making art, making the poetry. I may write what I would publicly have to call poetry, and it lives in the poetry world, but it's not really like other poetry for the most part. So it's not about judgment. I think we spend a lot of time in our intellectual life trying to decide if something is or isn't art, if it's good or bad art, should I buy it or shouldn't I buy it, should I relate to this or not relate to this. And so we project what should be a very intrinsically intimate aspect of your own being to an outside standard. And so you have culture, you have the greatness and the minor and the major and all of that. And it doesn't really help you be in the state of what art can give you. And I think it obstructs. So I'm at odds with a lot of aspects of how we learn, teach, and maintain art in our culture. There are other cultures that do it somewhat differently. It's an actual expression of an entire way of being. So I made my little statement. Am I forgetting anything I promised to say? No, I don't think so. So anyway, I'm going to introduce you and invite John Beaulieu, who invented this whole tuning fork reality that he's been developing over many years. He's also a fantastic musician, fantastic composer, creative being, who has just done the most remarkable things. He's also been a healer and a therapist of various different descriptions, because he's mastered many different traditions of healing and music. And so, I think, John, you tell them what you're going to do.
I'm here to support George. And I have a little history. When I first saw you do the axial drawing, it was just one of those moments. As you say, it had nothing to do with art, had nothing to do with anything. There was just something in there that was so fundamental. A gift to humanity, you know, and everything about it was inspiring, I would say. And it's been a while, but you were the one, remember, I don't know if you remember, in the first performance we did of Axial Music, you drew. And David Arner and I did the sounds for you. It's,
wow.
It's on the videos there.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. And that was the first time I accompanied you in doing that.
Yeah.
And I was so honored, I was so happy. I said, we got to figure out how to do this more, right? And then I believe you came and you drew for one of my classes and concerts, and everybody loved it. You know, everybody was just amazed by the whole thing. And I then of course I took all your axial drawings that you had published, and I sat down and used them as music scores. And if you go to my Bandcamp, you'll find I performed all your axial drawings. And I get so into it, because you weren't there, went through Europe, I would put them on slides, and I played them. So we're talking about hundreds of performances I've done with you not even there. Just your energy there from the drawing. I liked it so much. So I see his drawings actually as music scores, as well as drawings. And tonight, I think it's a completion. I want to tell you why, because we also have a friend in common who's Franz Kamen. And many years ago, Franz was the person who introduced me to composer Alexander Scriabin. Now, Alexander Scriabin was a Russian mystic composer, a little bit crazy, which is good. Thank goodness, how would he compose otherwise? And he created something called the mystic chord. And that's exactly what I felt. So you called them dakinis, right? And the mystic chord was meant to manifest exactly what you were doing. So right at that moment was the same thought. We have now, they're manifesting, but what about Scriabin? He wrote, his last piece was called Mysterium. He never completed it. But when you read what he had in mind, he saw bells hanging from clouds in India that were reading harmonics, the mystic chord, that would set up an environment that the bikinis or devas both could manifest. I said, this is it. So what I've done tonight with the tuning forks, I said, we were doing it with pianos, with electronic instruments. I said, wait a minute, these could be bells hanging from the clouds, you know, and let's be a little more organized about it. So I put together, can I borrow this was so the people walk around with these. There's tuning forks in those, and they tap like this. So the whole room will be filled with a very controlled ambient sound. But what is the ambient sound? Scriabin's mystic chord. Right? And as pure as could be, 100% pure. Tuned Pythagorean, the way he liked it. And he said that when the chord rings, it sounds 3 harmonics at the 9th level of the harmonic series. That's overtones. I have them. So even those tuning forks will be sounding there. You'll hear in the room little sounds like this. Right? So it's all sounding into Scriabin's mystic chord, but now we bring it out a little louder. Right? Because I want to set the ambient environment for you to manifest what you do. That's what's happening. Right? So, are you ready? And you can take all the time you want because the ambient sound will just keep going in the room.
Okay, thank you. That's so great. Thank you.
So, I know you like to get entranced to do it, so.
Well, let's see if I can do that.
Yeah.
Now that we've set you up for something really fantastic, I'm going to take it all back. I need the space for it not to be expected to be fantastic. Not only that, I can promise you that it will be every bit as interesting as watching paint dry.
Good. We ready for the sounds? We have tappers in the room. I would think these are all people from my class.
screws up all the paper. I literally cannot see them when I've done them. And my eyes are closed when I've done them. My eyes are closed, and afterward I cannot see them. So it's not until Susan, there she is. Susan Quasha comes in and looks at them and says what's good about them. Then I can start to see them. It used to be that I would wait till the next day to look at them, but I'm more impatient, and so I bring her in immediately and we look at them. And I should say that this work is deeply collaborative with Susan. I learned seeing by writing poems in relationship to her photography, and it teaches me how to see actually my own work. That there is work that happens co-performatively at levels that we are unaware of. And we discover that, if we are willing to discover that. And you have to really kind of find that inside yourself, inside your relationship to another person. It's a discovery, and not something you can, there's no technique that will produce it. You have to find it through opening your own being to what's actually the case. It's not about inventing something or making something happen. It's about recognizing what is happening inside your life. And so the work is actually a kind of tool to uproot that stuff that you are actually about. And in your interconnect, I call it eco-proprioception, that self-knowing happens co with other being, and you don't recognize that. But if one could recognize that, then one can learn to cultivate it by attention, not by effort, but simply by acknowledging it and staying present with it and listening to it. There's something inside us that speaks that is drowned out by our worries about being good, meaningful, important, relative to other beings, somehow as good or better or whatever that is. And that blinds us to what is intrinsically happening because we think that that's selfish. We only look into ourselves. But my point is that by looking deeply in yourself, you see otherness. You see your connectedness to other beings. And that's quite different from how we construct our picture of reality and judge. We're judging all the time. We're discriminating our importance, or did we do this, and we're scolding ourselves, and we're picking on ourselves, and we're not up to par. Par. Being is par. Being. And we don't accept that because we have a culture that is structured to make sure you don't discover that. I'm sorry, that's the case. And so I simply stand for an art form that it's not a career, in my case, obviously, but it's a commitment of attention and awareness. I'm sorry to give a lecture about what you've just seen me do, but I don't know, I'm compelled to say whatever comes to my mind in this kind of context. And forgive me if it sounds like I'm preaching.
It's not.
People do think I did that.
And Susan,
Thank you.
Can Susan interact?
But Susan doesn't interact with them physically. She interacts with them mentally, with me, and she shows me what they are. I see them through her attention. And they actually come from her attention to a large extent. I mean, we've been together so many years, so many decades,
Lifetimes.
that we don't know who's what. And that's a pleasure. Because, I mean, she steals my thoughts all the time. No, I mean, she says I steal hers, obviously. And who knows? You know, who's on first? There isn't a first. But, yeah, hi.
It's my first time that I've seen anything like this. Would you say this is a synthesis of something like
Tai Chi with sound and a visual expression of the synthesis of all this?
Help me. My
The
hearing isn't so
question
good.
is
The
are you
question
asking
is-
if it's a synthesis of Tai Chi and sound?
Tai Chi-like movement,
Tai Chi-like movements,
Okay.
well, he has been doing
sound and visual.
Tai Chi has a visual imprint that we have about it. People go very slowly. I practiced this for many years, and you learn the moves. I think it's taught very badly, and people use their cognitive function up here, which should be learning from here, and this blocks it. But that's just how we learn, by mirrors, by you stand, and they teach us Chinese. You stand in class like this, you might be standing there for 5 minutes while he goes around to the whole class and says, adjust the shoulder. You stand there. This is not Tai Chi. It works in China because they start teaching this when they're about 2 years old. They start seeing it happen, that's the teaching. And then they start to want to look like daddy. But the way they're looking like daddy in that culture is flowing with daddy. And so by the time they get to the age where they're judging themselves and trying to look like other people and sound like other people, which is inevitable, it's how language works, how culture works, they have already imprinted in their actual being. It's like those people who have grown up in a culture and they learned a language and then they forgot the language, but if it's always there, they can come back to it with a little bit of study because it's imprinted in them. And this is a principle that when you absorb it at that age, you can't screw it up after that. But when they bring this to this country, and we mostly start these things when we're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, promising good health and all the things that it promises, we've already spent a lifetime trying to do what's right, rather than try to be a right in our own condition. And in however that is with other people, so if we were that together, it would be self-regulating and self-corrective in a dynamic way. But we're always trying to name the position and oppose it to another position and define it's dialectical rather than dialogical. We want to be in dialogue with the world in a sensorial level. This is the view that I'm obviously promoting in this moment. And it's not to make any other thing wrong. I mean, Da Vinci did his prove that you could do it the other way, but he had it in him already. And that's what people don't know, that when they can analyze Da Vinci or Michelangelo or whatever it is and come up with a kind of position of clarity about what has happened in that work, and therefore what must be true. The what must be true is interpreted according to an already given point of view, what we call an ontology, that which is already a symbolism, kind of a belief system, kind of an understanding of reality that is in us from the first day. Then with a being who is born with that potential, that does happen. You know, all these little kids who are 3 years old who play Rachmaninoff, you know, an incredible number of young prodigies that are happening. You just have to go through YouTube, there are endless new ones all the time. And it's incredible. How can you doubt that some people are simply born with more going on that level? I can't play Rachmaninoff, you know. And I don't think I have it in me to play Rachmaninoff. But that's the thing. We have to find out what we have in us. But we prioritize certain of the ones because they've been celebrated in the culture. And therefore that suffuses the particularity of our own manifestation. And that's what I'm against. I'm against that blockage, that limiting of our perspective to what we understand to be right. Understanding only approaches the threshold. It doesn't cross the threshold. Crossing the threshold is something you learn to do. However, and there are many, many, many systems that claim to be the ones. They all work for some people, but we're all different. So, you know, follow what you're attracted to and forget the rest. Really. We think that's the work of the devil or something, that we follow our attractions, our desires. That's the problem. We think that. I'm a disciple of William Blake, who worked this out very deeply. And I'm still studying him. There are other systems too that I study, but there you go. I guess anybody want to say anything or ask anything, I'm up for grabs.
So I'm very curious as to how you relate to your works after the fact. And you've spoken a bit about the fact that you don't do it right away.
Yeah, right.
And that also it's in some ways guided with your partner to re-examine the work through her eyes.
Yeah.
And you also talk about not judging your work.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you look
Decide.
at your work. I mean, are there some works that you feel
Absolutely.
align more with your
You see
principles?
them in this shop.
Okay.
There are hundreds, you know, and there's some that I don't look at much, and others that I do, and I keep changing my feeling about them. But the simple answer is by attraction now. You know, I don't care to decide which are the good ones, frankly. There are some that I feel I'm willing to spend the money to have them framed and the time and effort and to lean upon my friends to help me produce a public thing of it. You know, I'm a little hesitant about that, you know, in the sense that, you know, it's just what I like, you know. That's all. I mean, and that changes.
But it's not purely compositional, of course.
No, I do not think compositionally. And people, you know, it's quite interesting sometimes when people say, oh, I love the composition, and they start talking about it. It's fascinating. But I have no idea what they're talking about. You know? And actually, if I do put it together mentally, then, you know, I appreciate that. And, you know, I don't know what to make of it. You know, there are definitely some that have more embodiment. See, William Blake said the human imagination is what distinguishes us from everything else. That's the transformative condition. It's simply the word we use to express this altered state of stepped up intensity that we are able to somehow find our relationship to, and that produces this thing that we are. Now, whether they're doing it in this outrageous way that I do it, or in a more careful way, it doesn't matter. I'm not against people's incredible skill. I don't have much, so I work without it. But this room is filled with incredible artists. You know, I call out their names and tell you how fantastic their work is. And they have their own ways of doing it, you know. Some of it involves great skill. Some of it is more on the sort of intuitive side. And some of them are transitioning from one to the other as life goes on, you know. I don't say that there's a right approach. I say that there is a right orientation of being, which is a mysterious factor that I have no particular general knowledge about. I don't think general knowledge about it is particularly valuable. Because it's a study in your own practice. And it can be absolutely conceptually perfect and creative and have everything I'm talking about. I'm not against anything. Because everything is a manifestation of a path of accomplishment. And that path can be an obstacle if it becomes an obstacle, but that's totally individual. Totally individual. People use highly precise systems to produce incredible intuitive acts. It's mysterious to me that they can do that. But they do. No doubt about it.